The number of young Americans in juvenile detention dropped by 77% over the last 2 decades, from 100,000 to just over 25,000, according to data from the Federal Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. President Joe Biden appointed youth justice advocate Liz Ryan to run that office last year. Liz joins me now to talk about the latest in juvenile justice and what's to come. Liz, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Nicole.
I want to start off by asking, this data is from 2020, but has much changed since the pandemic?
So, Nicole, we don't have new data since the pandemic, new national data, but what we do know is that the pandemic has had a dramatic impact on young people in the justice system in terms of both their incarceration in the justice system and also their ability to access services and supports during that time. And as we kind of move to lifting the pandemic emergency, we're hopeful that we'll see continued reductions in the use of detention and incarceration for young people.
What do you attribute some of those changes around, how the pandemic may have influenced youth incarceration? What do you think are some of the underlying factors that have gone into those changes?
Yeah, so young people, when they're detained or incarcerated, they have limited access to programming. They have limited contacts with their families, and the pandemic just exacerbated that, right? So people who were trying to obtain educational services inside detention and correctional facilities had very limited and even further limited access during the pandemic because educators weren't coming into detention and correctional facilities to offer those services during much of the pandemic. We also know that visitation from family members was very limited, right? And for young people to be able to successfully uh, age out of the juvenile justice system and desist from juvenile crime, we know that connection with family is critically important for that. So the lack of young people's ability to connect with family is very, very challenging. Another piece that we saw, and in fact, several jurisdictions filed lawsuits over this, is that children were kept in their rooms for long periods of time in some states, some localities, and that was because of staffing, staff not coming into the office, into the facilities and offering, those kinds of services. And that is something that we're very concerned about. It impacts a young person's mental health. It impacts their growth and development.
What have you seen work or what's been successful as you've been in this office as you navigate that element of children needing to be reintegrated after serving some time in the juvenile justice system?
That's a great question. What's really most important for young people who are leaving detention or correctional facilities is to get reconnected right away to their families, to their communities, to community based supports, to educational opportunities and employment opportunities. And in fact, we shouldn't wait until the day that a young person leaves a facility to make that happen. We need to start that the second a young person enters a facility because those young people are going to come home and we need to make sure they're fully prepared to come home and that they're being set up for success. All too often, those kind of reentry plans are not put into place. And so we are setting up young people for failure if we don't make sure that those plans are in place. One of the things that this office does is to implement the Second Chance Act, and we have a grant program where we offer resources to jurisdictions across the country, plus training and technical assistance on how to be the most effective reentry programs possible. We're really excited about this conversation right now that we're having because Second Chance Month, which is the month of April, and that's a month where we really lift up the kinds of effective programs that work, where we're hearing from young people about what they believe works and what will help them return to the community and to move forward in a positive direction. I want to also mention that young people tell us all the time that they want mentors. They want people that they can trust that can help them navigate all of the challenges of becoming an adult. And oftentimes they want to talk to somebody who has lived experience. And so this notion of credible messengers, people who have lived experience in the system and who have successfully navigated it, helping young people to do that themselves.
So we've talked a little bit about how, proactive planning can help with this reintegration element. But there are also, as you mentioned, in terms of mentors and other things, some of these either unknown or in some cases, in the instance of the youth themselves, inarticulable needs that they are still trying to identify or that may potentially be kind of barriers or impasses in terms of navigating life and re-entering society. What are some of those other barriers that come up for youth trying to reintegrate themselves?
There's unfortunately a lot of barriers, Nicole. One of them, it has to do with a young person's record and being able to expunge that record. Part of the whole initiation of the juvenile court system more than 100 years ago was to provide a path forward for young people to be rehabilitated. And part of that means that their record, once they've been in the system, that their record can potentially be expunged or sealed, and so that way they can move forward and not have the stigma of having been in the system. That's one barrier. Another barrier is that young people often, they want employment opportunities, and when they were detained or incarcerated, did they even access opportunities to get those kinds of skills to get gainful employment? There are also other barriers related to, housing. Like some people leave incarceration and they enter homelessness, right? There isn't a place for them to go. There isn't, uh, for some children. So we know that there are a lot of barriers, and I think our office is really focused on trying to eliminate those barriers, trying to open up more opportunities, because something that comes up in every single conversation with young people is that they need employment. And let me mention one other thing. The juvenile justice system has a whole array of fees and fines that young people and their families are charged for almost every uh, step in the system, right? That they're actually uh, that actually holds them back, right? So young people are racking up enormous fees and enormous fines while they're in the justice system, while they're incarcerated, and that really hinders their ability to move forward when they've got enormous debt uh, because of their involvement in the system.
Why is it important for children to be reintegrated into their communities, both on an individual level in terms of youth themselves, but why is it important from a societal perspective?
Well, Nicole, with that's another really great question. I mean, let me tell you what the research tells us. The research tells us that delinquent behavior is normal adolescent behavior. Most young people will engage in delinquent behavior during their teenage years. And the good news is that most young people will age out of that delinquent behavior as they mature, right? And we know from the adolescent brain development research that young people are still forming their who they are as their identity, but also they're still maturing, right? And up until roughly age 25 is when a young person's brain develops. So what we know is that there is an opportunity to shape the direction that a young person moves in, and that young people themselves know this, right? So um, we have opportunities to intervene. So we're doing everything we can to keep kids out of the system in the first place. But if they do come into contact with the system, that we want to make sure it's fair and we want to make sure it's beneficial for that young person. Young people are going to come home, and they're going to come home to communities, and we want to make sure that they have the tools and that they have the skills and that they have the resources to be successful. And that's what our office is 100% focused on.
As you mentioned previously, studies show that children who have been incarcerated suffer mental health issues even after they've been released. What more can be done to prevent that type of harm?
There's a lot of things that can be done to prevent that harm, Nicole. One is that we really need to make sure that young people access mental health services before they ever come into contact with the justice system, right? We need to make sure there are community based services that are culturally competent, that are relevant to young people, that young people are able to access those from wherever they are. And there is a shortage of mental health workers right now in the pandemic time. And so we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to connect young people with these kinds of services. We see all too often that young people are funneled into the justice system because they're not accessing these community based services. So they may have mental health issues before that. But then what happens in the juvenile justice system is that we are spending, that the states and localities are spending the most amount of their resources on the strategy that produces the worst outcomes, and that is incarceration. So when a young person is incarcerated, we're actually exacerbating mental health issues. We are making it much more difficult for young people to recover from that and to become successful. So we have to do much more work on the front end. We have to make sure that young people, when they are detained or incarcerated, particularly incarcerated for long periods of time, that they are accessing services, but to ensure that those services are there when they come out.
Liz Ryan, head of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Nicole, for taking up this timely and important topic.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nicole Ellis.